My name is Deborah Heel, and I'm the author of the Time and Again Mystery Time Travel Series. You can learn more about my books on my website, deborahheel.com. But I'm here today to talk about another author. I'd like to tell you how I met her. I'm a member of the John 3:16 Author Network, and through them I was informed that a writer named Trish Jenkins was looking for a blog host to help her launch her book, Treasures of Darkness. I emailed Trish back and volunteered that she could star on my blog, deborahheel.com. So not long after that, she called me, surprisingly enough, from Brisbane. And I had no idea that she was Australian until I heard her wonderful accent coming across the waves across the world. And she suggested that, how about we do a video interview? And I said, well, I've never done that before, but okay. I said, sure. And then she very quietly asked me if I knew what her book was about. And I said no, and she explained that it was about her experiences in prison. And I was a little surprised, but I said, hey, not a problem. But maybe I should read the book first. And so she said to me, I did. And I didn't tell her this, but I sort of dreaded reading the book because I thought, wow, this might be a little heavy. I'm not sure I can deal with this. But I was curious to know how a Christian ended up in prison. And I suppose most of us believe it could never happen to us. But what if it did? And not because you live in some third world place where Christians are persecuted, but because you actually are guilty of a crime. But on the other hand, I had just watched several episodes of the popular new Netflix series Orange is the New Black the week before. The show is similar to Trish's book in that it is based on the real-life experiences of a wealthy, middle-class white woman's prison experiences among prostitutes, murderers, and thieves. I found the show too depressing to continue watching, and so I wasn't sure I was going to be able to stomach Trish's book. But right off, when I started reading it, I was riveted by her story. Through the letters she sent her husband and friends, she gives us a painfully honest look at the darkness and shame of her incarceration in prison. She says, here's I quote, "I've watched countless courtroom dramas and even performed jury duty, but nothing prepared me for sitting in the dock as a criminal. I thought, this must be what Judgment Day will be like for those who don't know Christ." Later in the book she adds, "I have lost the right to personal dignity. I practice submission on a level that degrades me, yet I must play the game. We are treated like naughty children at a cold, callous boarding school without respect. Is my pride so great? Why is this stripping of my self-respect so hard to accept?" As I read these words and the others of her book, I was really just drawn into the story of Trish. So I found, though, that it's much more than a description of prison despair. Trish was determined to have the right attitude about her incarceration, though that her experience would not be wasted. She held on to the biblical promise that God is able to make all things work together for good, even in prison, and He did. Now it is my honor to introduce you to Trish Jenkins. Hello, Trish.
Hi, Deborah. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad that you introduced yourself to me and for suggesting a video interview. That's new for me, but I'm always happy to learn new technology. Seems like we're always learning something new. Let me start by saying how touched I was by your honesty in describing the transformation of your attitude about your fellow prisoners. You began seeing yourself as less guilty than the murderers, thieves, and prostitutes. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, you know, my crime as such was not one of theft. It was more of poor judgment, and I'd always thought of myself as a good person, as a godly person. And to put you in the picture, I had my husband and I had been very successful with investing in real estate, and we were looking for other investments. And I invested with a fellow who turned out to be a con artist, and I was doing some work for him not realizing that he was stealing money. And my job was to pay people, pay investors who brought money in, and each month he would provide a return. And then because he was stealing the money, he had only been giving back our own money it's called a Ponzi scheme. He'd been giving us back our own money and calling it returns on the investment. And of course the money ran out. And when he stopped, I didn't realize that's what had happened. And after 3 months of me being the person that was telling people, well, you know, he's not able to pay this month because of whatever reasons he gave me, I had 3 months of people, you know, needing their money, demanding their money. You know, I had skin in the game. I had 104,000 that he was trading with. That
must have been horrible to be on that other end, to have them asking, where's the money?
Oh, well, look, it was, and the only reason I was involved, you know, a lot of people just do things on their own, and you know, and they get wealthy, and you just don't know what they're doing. And you know, I was part of a church, and I had friends, and I wanted to help them get ahead, and they wanted to do what we were doing because we were successful. So we thought, well, we were, if we'd stuck to what we knew, which was property, we would have been fine. But I couldn't take it anymore, and I wasn't cut out for that sort of work, and you know, my boundaries were blurred, and once again I wanted to rescue people, and I'm not saying that to make myself look noble, but I just couldn't take it, and I paid them with funds that came in just to give them some relief, and I shouldn't have. Now I rang the guy and said, look, you know, you need to pay people, and could we use this money here? And he said, yeah, let's do that. So I paid everybody with that. So I didn't take it for myself. But what I did was still wrong, and I knew I shouldn't have done it, but I just couldn't see an alternative. And sometimes,
well, I think there's a huge distinction there. I certainly agree that so much different than so many other folks who've got caught up in the get-rich-quick schemes, and that's not what was going on at all. So I'm glad you explained that to our listeners.
But you see, that's the reason that I thought I was different to everybody else, because I thought, well, I didn't set out to hurt anybody. I didn't, you know, rob a bank or deal drugs and things like that. And so I started out seeing this distinction between, you know, what, you know, real criminals and criminals of circumstance. And it is true, there is a distinction between people who set out to hurt people and those who, through circumstances, find themselves under certain pressures that cause them to make decisions that are not right. But then, as I got to know a lot of these people and hear their stories, I started to see, you know the phrase, there but for the grace go I? When you put yourself in someone else's shoes with their story, it changes how you see things. And I found that I had a lot more compassion, and I thought, you know, there but for the grace of God go I. Had I been brought up in their home with their parents, with their abuse,
exactly,
or even spiritually, you know, that there are the things that are hereditary and different dispositions that happen, mental illness, all of these things conspire to create circumstances that put pressure on the decisions that we make. And
you're right.
you know, God does not distinguish between sins. There are a few sins that He says are, you know, abomination, and but a lot of those ones are not necessarily against the law. You know, pride, a lying tongue. You know, you don't go to jail. Well, you can go to jail for that, but everyday lies you don't go to jail for. And pride is a big one. Thinking that we're better than someone else, or thinking really. Our pride is what makes us independent from God and makes us think that we don't need Him. And so He lists that as one of the worst sins. But apart from those ones, generally, it's the rules that we have that put people in jail are man-made. So what would put someone in jail 100 years ago or even 40 years ago are not necessarily the same things that will put someone in jail now. I'm not saying it's right, that what someone did is right. I'm not saying that at all. But you look at people through different eyes, less judgmentally, when you hear their stories. And you think, well, you know, we live in a fallen world, and if we looked after each other better, if we parented our children better, if we supported families that are struggling better, if we had godly education, then, and more people went to church, went to Sunday school, and we didn't have the perversions that distort and interfere with a person's appetites and turn them into something monstrous, then we wouldn't have this. But we do have a sin nature. We do have this tendency towards the dark side, and some people seem to be naturally more drawn to it than others, or they're attracted to people. A lot of these women are in prison because they're co-accused of a man who is bad, and they are kind of along for the ride and have no choice. I mean, yes, we all have a choice, but if you're getting bashed up every day, then by someone who is committing crimes, then it's an awfully hard cycle to break free from.
Yes, it's so easy to compare our sins to someone else's and think, well, I'm not so bad, but none of us have reached God's standard. And I do think it's important as human beings of course, we have to make judgments about someone like, say, a Hitler compared to other sins. But yes, you're right, none of us reach this level of God's standard. So yes, we're all sinners, that's for sure. We all have that sin nature, and there's no getting around that. Another thing I really appreciate about your book is how honest you are. You're just not afraid to talk about real nitty-gritty issues facing real people. I try to do this too in my fiction, and sometimes it's not always appreciated by some folks that are just a little bit more sensitive. But so, for example, in my one of my books, I tackled domestic abuse, and I tried to, of course, didn't want to get into huge details about that, but I think it's important for Christian fiction and nonfiction to talk about those issues that are really out there that people face, and not just pretend like all is well and just kind of ignore those. Those are ugly topics, and they need to be talked about. And we miss opportunities to minister if we don't. So I was really grateful that you were so honest in your portrayal of what went on there. It was a little shocking, some of the things that you talked about, but we need to hear those. We need to know about them. You said that the nurse told you that upwards of 96% of the women that were in prison had been either sexually or physically abused.
Yes.
And I don't know if that figure's still current, but wow, that's shocking. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, look, it really is. When you go in and you get processed, they ask you lots of questions, and most of the questions are about abuse and sexuality, which surprised me. But I guess they're not interested in whether I had chicken pox as a child. And I mean, the figures, there aren't any concrete figures. The figures are anecdotal because you don't know, where. You don't know whether someone's telling the truth, but generally speaking, a lot of these people are in prison because they've come from backgrounds that are really rough, and often the story goes that that a woman, she'll be born very often into a family where there's poverty and pressure and rejection, and if they're not parented properly and there's no boundaries, then a little girl can easily be touched up by family members, brothers, cousins, friends. Her brother's friends when they're, yes. Often they might be touched up when they're 6 or 9 or even 12 when they're, with the cousins and or even just with the school friends or the brother's friends, and there's no one to go to protect. And this is actually happening more and more in better suburbs, in more middle-class families where both parents are working, and there's nothing wrong with both parents working as long as they don't forget to parent. You can be so
exactly. Exactly. You notice it. People just get really upset about when you mention that it might be a good idea for someone to be taking care of the kids. That is just so unpopular today. You really get stares if you say that, but somebody's, if you can't cope with a job and doing that, then, well, I'm saying the kids come first.
Look, they do, and if you threw the TV out, you might actually find the time that you need for your children. Seriously, you know, people come home, they're tired, they're stressed, and I get that. I've been in that position where I've been working, and you think the last thing I want to do is cook dinner, so you might do something quick and easy, and you just want to be left alone, so you sit in front of the TV, where you're alone with strangers talking stupid talk on TV. What if you made yourself turn off the TV? Hey kids, let's go outside and kick a ball around. Let's just go for a walk around the block and just talk and just unwind. Find different ways to unwind that include your family, because your children want time with you. And if you have to work, you have to work. In Australia, it's quite unusual for a woman to be able to have the luxury of being at home. And so I don't want anybody to feel guilty about working.
Exactly.
You have to put food on the table. But the thing is, an unparented, unsupervised child or children will get up to no good. And if you haven't had the conversations and taught them, this is why you respect people, because they are worthy of respect. These are the personal boundaries. You don't let people touch you a certain way, and you don't touch anybody else in a way that is not appropriate. And getting back to the issue at hand, the story was often repeated to me that, you know, they'd been interfered with as kids. They couldn't enunciate it as well as what I could read into what they were saying. Like when they were children, they couldn't say, I'm angry because my cousin is touching me whenever he comes to visit. But as an older person, they go, yeah, well, that happened to everybody. They'd sort of come to accept it. But it affected them. So they're carrying this anger and this hurt and this disappointment. Their parents are not protecting them, or perhaps a parent is a perpetrator, you don't know. And so they go to school feeling these feelings that are too big for children to feel, and they can't learn. You know, they're affected mentally and emotionally. They can't learn. They feel different. They feel tainted. They feel, and they can't put words to it. So they play up. They're rebellious. They find a sense of belonging in the group that misbehaves, because they tend to find each other, and then they find their only real sense of love and comfort comes from, for example, boys who tell them what they want to hear in order to touch them where do things, and then that rebellion and anger is natural. So they start drinking, and then someone's got some marijuana, and then there's something else, and they just want to try. They want to do whatever the parents don't want them doing. They'll want to do, because they're angry and hurting and rebellious and feeling unloved. Now, sure, they might be loved, but they don't feel loved. And so they're not learning their skills. They're not learning to read, to write, to communicate, to obey authority, and that affects their ability to gain employment. And if they've got a drug addiction, then eventually they're going to have to do things to get the money to pay for that addiction, and that often includes shoplifting, crime. If they haven't been taught proper boundaries of respect and to be law-abiding, or even to care, if the law hasn't protected them from a predator, why would they trust in the law for anything else? Oh,
yes, we can see that. That's quite a cycle of just an endless, hopeless cycle without the Lord's intervention. They're bound for failure, and all really based, I think, if you've got down to it, on trying to get a sense of self-worth on something that's faulty, instead of understanding that you are made in the image of God and you have worth, and you don't have to do what the boys say in order to be popular or to somehow rate as a girl or a woman. And it's a horrible situation, and so prevalent.
A lot of people, they become rebellious because they don't want to be told what to do, and then they join a gang where they're more in bondage to a despotic authority than they ever would have been had they lived a normal life. So they're more enslaved. They think they're free because they're rebelling against the law, but you try stepping out of line when you're in a gang, you'll have the sawdust beaten out of you. So, and it's really just particularly disadvantageous to women, especially if they've neglected their schooling. So how are they going to create a successful life if they haven't got a proper education and they haven't got those boundaries? So these are the people I was living with. And, when someone has had a particular trauma happen to them young in life, if they don't get help, it's kind of like that emotionally they sort of stick around that age bracket in maturity. And so it felt like these are grown women, mostly in their 20s, but many, not all of them, but many of them, their behaviour and the pressures of prison made them act out like they were adolescents.
Well, like arrested development, yes.
It is, it is. It's like you've got these women in their mid-20s, you know, backbiting, gossiping, setting each other up. You can't be her friend because she's my friend, and, you know, it's like, oh, what? But it's just how they are. And also as a Christian, you know, you have certain standards where you don't go, you know, gossip, you know, in my culture, gossip is sin. It's, you know, you don't sit around and backstab someone and run them down. And so I found myself, you know, in that sitting down, because there's a lot of time, you know, the devil makes work for idle hands, and if there's a lot of time on your hands, you're just sitting around. But I will make one distinction. The black women didn't do it. I actually really preferred to hang out with the Aboriginal women, because they just didn't have the same hang-ups as the white women, and they would sit around and they could just sit and enjoy each other's company. They didn't have to run down the one that wasn't
Very
there.
Interesting.
It just seems to be I mean, you know, you Americans are much more interested in black people, white people, and they do this and they do this, and we generally don't really notice it all that much. We don't really talk about it. I
noticed that.
You know, we're kind of, I don't know why. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion. But I actually found that to hang out with the Indigenous girls was quite soothing. I could just relax.
The sister girls.
Hey.
The sister girls?
Sister girls, yeah. Well, you know, I was very well accepted by them because, you know, our Indigenous, they're very spiritual people, even though many of them are quite naughty, and much of that is due to their intolerance for alcohol. Now, I'm not an expert, I'm not an anthropologist, and I don't like to be patronising, you know, in making generalisations, but I imagine that they probably have more in common with your American Indians.
I was just thinking that sounds like that. Yes.
Probably more like that rather than the Black Americans, but they still have similar issues of racism and discrimination, and, you know, not getting great customer service necessarily. But you see, you know, that doesn't just happen to them. That can happen to people who dress a certain way anyway. You know, that might look really rough and scary. They might, you know, find it hard to attract good customer service, or actually maybe they get better customer service because they do look a bit scary. But yeah, that's what I found. It spun my head around because, you know, I come from a nice kind of, you know, my hang-ups were to do with, yeah, sure, my parents got divorced, but, you know, a lot of people did, and I have a wonderful stepfather, and my parents, and I don't even think of him as my stepfather, he's my dad, has been since I was 3, and they're pastors. And the other thing is, our Indigenous, they are a spiritual people, and my experience with them has been through church. So I have always had a positive relationship. I don't see a difference. It's just, oh, you know, if anything, I have more of a warmth.
That comes through your book loud and clear. That your acceptance of the different races, but also your acceptance of the different social statuses. I was so impressed with how you were able to show them the love of Christ in such a honest and accepting way, and it really seemed to affect them. They seemed to really respond well to that.
Yeah, I just think that was a God thing.
Yes.
But, you know, my church experience has been multicultural when it comes to race, and so when you have that commonality with someone, you don't notice the differences. The differences are more to do with, oh, how did you make that curry so great? You know, how did you? And I was surprised when I met my first black person who couldn't sing. I thought, what? And I hate to sound ignorant and stereotypical, but you know, we had islanders in our churches, and, you know, and they all sang and they all loved God, and so I had this impression of just warmth towards them. But when they found out that I was not just a Christian, but that I was a genuine Christian,
right,
they could tell. that they definitely have an inner sense, as many people who are Indigenous do. That there's like an instinct, something in them that is just that gut instinct where they can tell things, and even some supernatural things. There was one lady, this Aboriginal lady, she would come to me for prayer, and I would agree, and she said, I just know something's up. And she didn't know, but I knew that they'd been talking about her. And she didn't know, but she knew in her inner knower.
How about that?
She was so well attuned. And I thought, man, if you had your life right and you were in church, you would be a leader. You would be one of these people that just prays and got real spiritual authority.
Right. But, someone who has that antenna up to other people's needs and problems. That'd be an awesome gift in the church.
Yeah, that's exactly a good way to put it, the antenna. They have a sensitive antenna. But as I said, look, I'm not an authority on it, and I don't want to insult them by pretending that I know, everything. I have an authoritative opinion about how they are. What I know is my experience, and my experience was that, adversity comes to all of us, and mine was extreme, but I had to choose to go through it the way I believed that God would have me go through it, or it would destroy me.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
With our listeners, your experience will be different, but you need to go through it the way that God would have you go through it. And if you don't know how he would have you go through it, you read your Bible and you find out how to go through it. And that means keeping a forgiving heart. How do you do that? You ask God, you say, God, show me this person the way you see them, because I just can't stand them right now. I'm so hurt and angry. And I had plenty of opportunities to get hurt and angry, Deborah. Trust me, we're talking prison, where you barely have basic manners to deal with. And you have people that are not looking after you the way the rules. So, there are certain rules, there are certain procedures and protocols that the officers are supposed to follow, and it doesn't always happen. And they don't care, they don't. Some of them do. Officers are very much like school teachers, where you have the ones who are idealistic. They want to make a difference and they care, and it's really good when they're rostered on. And then you have the ones who are like the school teacher, who is a bit burnt out, doesn't care, isn't interested, just turns up for the pay packet, and they're no use. They're no danger, but they're no use, and they're no help.
The kids know that, don't they? Every kid knows.
Yep. And then you have the school teachers who look at the kids and say, you will be the ruination of the earth. You're little hoodlums, and they're rotten, and they just hate the kids, can't stand coming to school, and everything that they say is just going to be nasty and unhelpful. And you get officers like that.
I'm a former school teacher, and I ran across all those categories of teachers everywhere I went. There were some that really cared, and some they were just putting in their time, and some who, I've often said that, they come in there predisposed to hate the kids, assume the worth, that they're little idiot, they're little, like you say, little hoodlums. They're going to give you trouble, and so they are predisposed to see everything they do in a negative light. So, I hadn't thought about that, but it's a great corollary to the prison guard experience.
I think so. I guess the major difference is that, I don't know anybody who says that when they were a child, they wanted to grow up and be a prison officer.
Right.
It's probably not a goal you set a goal for when you're 10 years old.
As much a prisoner as you were.
Well, they were,
ways.
And they're tied to it financially. I could just leave. I didn't have to worry about impressing anyone to get parole. I was just to be released at a certain date. But yeah, they're stuck there. And the unfortunate thing is that there is a bit of a turnover where, people who do care and who are good, they often get burned out. But we need good. I wouldn't want to work in a correctional facility, and yet we need good people in there. We need good people who can remain strong and untainted by the atmosphere.
Right.
of positivity. So
let's talk some more about how you felt in there. The Lord used you in a great way in there, but that's not to say that you didn't have your down times. You very openly discussed at one point that you had a problem with depression. Could you talk about that and how? I'm so glad you brought up the point, the command that Christ gives us in Matthew 25 to minister unto the least of these. You had a great story about that in there. I hope people will read that. But it's so important to remember, we on the outside, to remember that we need to minister to the down and out, including those in prison, no matter for what reason they might be there. So tell us about how your down times and how people ministered to you.
look, there were times when I just had enough of the people, and I thought I would be a model prisoner. I thought because I was a good, decent person, I would just fit right in and do all the rules the right way and just come out the other end. And it just wasn't to be. I'm also fairly naive and idealistic, and so I'm not naturally savvy. I don't have a lot of street smarts. And so when you've got rules, you've also got unwritten rules that everybody gets. But I don't. I actually was seeing a psychologist for a little while after I got out, and I said to him, because he was also a specialist in Asperger's, and I said, do you think I might have a touch of that? Because I just don't get things sometimes. Maybe that explains things. I mean, there's no disrespect. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but I thought, is there something in my brain that just doesn't get the stuff that other people know? Like, everybody knew not to talk to that person. But I would see someone on their own, and I would just take responsibility for going over there and talking to them, And I do have a slightly rebellious streak in that, there was one girl that was being, ostracized, and she was a black girl and she was pregnant, and she was angry and she had an attitude, and she didn't win anyone over, so she kind of didn't help the situation either. And, it was kind of, someone had to point out to me that, it's best not to talk to that girl. And I just thought to myself, I'm already in prison. I'm not getting told what to do even further. Not a chance. No one. And I just thought, no, I'm not putting up with that. I'm not going to play that game. And I deliberately, and it was Christ in me, that rebellion, that healthy rebellion. And I did, right, and I made great friends with her. The discouragement, and I paid a price for that, with the nastiness of some people and the backstabbing. But depression, it didn't last long. There were the pressures that were brought to bear when I went to God in prayer. And the good thing about prison is that there are few distractions. Like, there's a lot going on, but it is, when you're in your cell on your own, because sometimes I had to share with someone and sometimes I was on my own, it's very lonely, you're very alone. Mm-hmm. And you're kind of forced to talk to God. Now, you can waste time watching TV or, doing something like a crossword or something, if you've got that sort of material, but you don't have a whole family around you that you've got to cook for, and you've got to do this for, and you've got to do this and that and the other. So that solitude, I would take that depression to God. And the best prayer that helped me through, that will help people listening through, is say, God, is to just be honest to God, and just say, God, I give up. I hand this all over to you. I just hand it over. I don't know what to do about this. And show me how you see this. That's a really powerful prayer, because I knew that my view was skewed. Like, the way we see things is through our pain and our emotions and hurt and anger and from our perspective and what we're missing out on, and through selfishness. And when we say, God, show me that woman through your eyes, You see, forgiveness is a difficult thing. Forgiveness is not, people say, oh, it's just a decision, you just do it. And it's like, yeah, look, that's not true, because your emotions, you need to be able to line up. So, oh, well, emotions are liars and they're just not real. Emotions are real and they hurt.
Yes.
And, it's a spiritual cop-out from someone who doesn't want to handle the actual issues to write someone off and say, oh, you just need to do this, you just need to do that. I'll tell you what you just need to do. What you need to do is get with God and say, God, show me how you see this. My mind is messed up. I'm not handling this well. Lord, show me how you see this. Show me Jesus in this dreadful person. Show me Jesus in this unjust circumstance. We say, oh, why, God, why whine? Why? You want some cheese with that wine. We don't whine to God. We don't say, oh, why is this happening? Like God has to justify himself to us. It's not that. It is, Lord, show me how you see this. And he would show me something about that person that would bring compassion in my heart. And I would see them through his eyes. And I would be able to pray his blessing on them. Now, you don't want to pray a blessing on someone who's annoying you, but when you make yourself do it, and sometimes you've got to make yourself, even in your depression. And I found that scripture, and I'd heard it before, but I felt that scripture. God, I trust you. Though you slay me, yet I will praise you. Because I felt like I was being slain. I felt like I was like, God, this is the end of me. What kind of a life can I have after prison? I don't know, but your word says that you make all things work together for good for those who love you. And God, I don't blame you. I am responsible for my decision that put me here. Don't ever blame God for your circumstances. Take responsibility for the bit that's yours. Don't take responsibility for someone else. Only for your own sin, and repent of it. And just say, God, these are the circumstances that we're in together, but I know that you have a plan for my life, and that your word says, when I honour you and I praise you, you will deliver me. And I spent time in the Psalms. The Psalms is a wonderful place to abide when you're feeling down and depressed. Psalm 91, there's a couple of verses at the very end of Psalm 91 that I actually personalised. Now, some people might be a bit offended about using the scripture in a different way, but I did, and it was at the end of Psalm 91, it says, because she has set her love upon me, therefore I will deliver her, and I will honour her. And I would put my name in there and say, this is about me, God, because I have set my love on you. I love you, God. You will deliver me. I know you will. I don't know what it looks like, but that's not for me to worry about. And Deborah, I came home and yes, I needed some healing. I needed some mental health with my mental health and my emotions, because there are some things that happen a little bit. But today I've got 3 books out, and I give public talks because the Lord prompted me to share the lessons that I learned about fraud. I became an expert on fraud warning signals, and I spoke to business groups about that. Once I had the courage to step out and do that, and people appreciated my message. And today I'm speaking to groups that are not Christian groups, but they get to hear what Jesus did because it's a natural part of the story. If I left God out, if I left Jesus out of my journey, it wouldn't be true. And they just accept that. So I speak to Christian groups and non-Christian groups, and with the different things that I learned, how to love the unlovable, how to
and they're both groups are really, the story is appealing to both of them. It's such a powerful story. So what a great opportunity to cross over.
Look, nothing else matters but bringing people just that bit closer to you. And to do that, it's not about telling them off or just saying, oh, you're wrong, you're living a wrong lifestyle, or this, that, and the other. It's about seeing them through Jesus' eyes. See them how God sees them. God sees them, he's going to blight them off the face of the earth. No. Jesus has already died on the cross to reconcile people to him. It's our job to reflect the love of Christ, and to, people don't care about your opinion unless they think you care about them. If you genuinely care about them, They'll feel it. They'll know it. It doesn't mean that you run round after them. It's in your eyes. It's in your voice. It's in your just your general demeanour towards them, and you will win them over. You know, and they will care about what you say, and you let Jesus change them. Now, yes, you might say, look, I didn't talk to them in terms of sin and righteousness because that's Christian language. I talked to them in terms of healthy choices and pressures, and that they're loved and that they matter and that God wants the best for their life. God wants a plan for their life. This business of having all these different partners, it's not healthy. It's not right for your life. You've got to get well and healthy so that God can bring someone to you who is well and healthy, and you have a marriage, not a pretend marriage, a marriage where, and raise your children up to know what's right and wrong and to treat them. That's how, you have a conversation with someone if they've invited you to do that. If you've earned the right to talk to them that way.
Right.
Rather than you're just a dirty, rotten sinner, and if you weren't such a tramp, you wouldn't be such a drain on the social security system. And it's like they already feel bad, and they
don't need another sledgehammer.
Oh yeah, is that going to win them to Christ? Is that really going to do that?
Please, I'd like for you to tell our listeners the Guns N' Roses story. I think that's a good example of. Well, it might be a way to round up everything we've talked about today. Is that one of the most powerful thing you said in that whole book? I think is that you told us that God is in the prisons and He is powerful, and I think that was just awesome to hear, and to hear that worship was going on in prison. So that's one reason I want you to tell the Guns N' Roses story. But another is because it's such a perfect example of how the Lord was showing you, making you sensitive to the moment, to really minister to the needs of the women in a non-judgmental way, just as you were talking about. So tell us the Guns N' Roses story.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I love that story. I would go to the gym, which was basically a shed with wire walls, not much in the way of walls. But I would run around the concrete floor of the gym, around the boundary of the basketball outline that we had, and so many laps was so many kilometres or miles. And as I ran, sitting in the corner on some gym mats were these girls, and one of them had a guitar, and so they were strumming away at the guitar, and I slowed down and stopped, and it sort of reminded me a little bit of church or the youth group or something like that, where someone's got a guitar, so you sit around and someone's trying to remember the chords of the song. And they said, oh, we're wanting to play a Guns N' Roses song. So they were strumming away at that, and one girl was, and I play a little bit, but not very well. And so, she seemed to know a few things, and I said, oh, so do you know House of the Rising Sun? I'm thinking of a song that, is kind of groovy. And I know it's an old song, but she did, and so they sang that song, because that's a song about a brothel, and it's kind of a sad kind of a song, and if people don't know it, but so we sang that, and I said, did you know that you can sing Amazing Grace to that song? And they said, really? Because they do sing Amazing Grace. It's one that, I was almost sick of it by the time I went in, because it seems to be the one song that everybody with any kind of church affiliation knows is House of the Rising Sun. So it's often sung at chapel and so on. So they know it. And so they said, really? And I said, yeah, play House of the Rising Sun. And so she starts strumming, and I sang to them, and I sang, it goes like this: Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. Anyway, I sang that.
Thank you very much.
Well, I sang that. I sang all the verses and the first one again with this amazing grace. And you know, the presence of God was so strong. And I turned around and some of them were crying. And I hadn't even met them before. And I said to them, do you know what? The Bible says, that which you do to the least of these, you do to me. And that's Jesus talking. And we are on the bottom of the rung. We are the least in society. And yet, Jesus said, whatever people do to us, they're doing to him. That's how much God thinks of us. That's how much compassion and love he has for us, for you. And, you know, we were hugging each other and praying and just it was just the most amazing anointed time that God was able to reach in and use me. You know, chaplains would come and visit, which is great, but I was among them. I was one of them. And there was a heart-to-heart contact where they encountered Jesus through a song sung to the tune of a terrible song, a really ungodly song, but it resonated with them. And so, you know, God can use anybody in any circumstance if you have a heart for it. You just don't know. You don't have to be a pastor. You don't have to be anyone special. You don't have to think that you've got to be this, that, or the other. You've just got to care. You've just got to care and be willing to offer what you have. And you'll touch people. And the satisfaction.
Thank you, Trish. That is so awesome. Thanks for sharing that story with us. I think it's a great way to end our discussion, our little interview. I appreciate so much that you took the time to do it, and I can't wait to share this on my blog with other people and let them hear how God was alive and working and well in your life and in prison. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Deborah. It's been great. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.